Picture Europe at the dawn of the 20th century, a complex web of alliances and rivalries, all waiting for a spark to ignite. The continent was a simmering pot of nationalistic fervor, militaristic might, and imperialistic ambitions. The major European powers, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary, were all vying for supremacy, their tensions threatening to bubble over into open conflict. At the heart of this volatile mix was the intricate system of alliances. It was a delicate, precarious balance designed to maintain peace, but it was also a powder keg, just waiting for the right spark. The dual alliance of Germany and Austria-Hungary, the Franco-Russian alliance, the Entente Cordiale between Britain and France, the Triple Entente of Britain, France and Russia. Each pact, each promise of support, was another thread in the web, another link in the chain. The spark that would set this tinderbox ablaze came on June 28, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist. This single act of violence was a match struck against the tinderbox of Europe. It was the event that would trigger a series of ultimatums, mobilizations, and declarations of war. The assassination of the Archduke led to Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia. Russia, bound by its alliance with Serbia, mobilized its forces. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, saw this as an act of war and declared war on Russia. France, linked to Russia through the Franco-Russian alliance, was then drawn into the conflict. Britain, through its obligations in the Triple Entente, also joined the fray. The dominoes had begun to fall. The stage was set, the players were ready, and with the fall of the Archduke, the curtain rose on the Great War. As the echoes of the Archduke's death faded, the drums of war began their ominous beat. In the wake of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, a complex web of alliances and treaties, coupled with nationalistic fervor and a thirst for power, led to a rapid series of declarations of war. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, which had the backing of Russia. This triggered a domino effect, pulling in nation after nation. The Central Powers, with the might of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and later the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria, stood in opposition to the Allies, comprised of the United Kingdom, France and Russia, later joined by Italy, Japan, and eventually the United States. These were the main players in a war that would soon engulf much of the globe. The initial strategies were as varied as the nations themselves. Germany, following the Schlieffen Plan, hoped to quickly knock out France by sweeping through neutral Belgium before turning their full attention to Russia. On the other hand, France, still nursing the wounds of the Franco-Prussian War, sought to regain the lost territories of Alsace and Lorraine. Meanwhile, Russia mobilized its vast forces, hoping to seize the opportunity to expand its influence in Eastern Europe. As for the British, they were determined to uphold the balance of power in Europe and protect their extensive overseas empire. The armies moved, the machinery of war roared into life, and the chessboard of Europe became a battlefield. The German forces swept into Belgium, meeting fierce resistance. France launched its offensive into Alsace and Lorraine, while Russia, faster than anticipated, invaded East Prussia. The world was no longer the same. The age of cavalries and muskets was giving way to the era of machine guns, tanks, and aircraft. The optimism of a quick war faded as the reality of a new kind of warfare dawned. The world watched in apprehension as the first shots of the war rang out. The early war of movement soon ground to a halt, giving way to a brutal stalemate. As the early days of World War I faded, the Western Front transformed into a vast network of trenches stretching from the English Channel to the Swiss border. This was trench warfare, a grueling and destructive form of battle that was as much a war of attrition as it was a test of endurance. Soldiers hunkered down in muddy, rat-infested trenches, living in conditions that were nothing short of nightmarish. Cold, wet, and often under constant enemy fire, they waited for the order to go over the top, a command that often meant a charge into a hailstorm of bullets. The Battle of the Somme, which took place in the summer and autumn of 1916, is a prime example of the deadly nature of trench warfare. The first day alone saw the British Army suffer the worst one-day loss in its history, with nearly 60,000 casualties. The battle raged on for over 4 months, resulting in over 1 million casualties on both sides, all for a gain of just 7 miles of territory. Not far from the Somme, the Battle of Verdun raged on with similar ferocity. Lasting from February to December in 1916, it was the longest single battle of World War I. The French and Germans threw themselves at each other with reckless abandon, resulting in an estimated 700,000 casualties. The aim was not so much to gain territory, but rather to bleed the enemy dry. These battles and others like them along the Western Front represented a new kind of warfare, a warfare of trenches, of attrition, and of human waves crashing against unyielding defenses. It was a war where advances were measured not in miles, but in yards. And it was a war where the value of human life seemed to diminish with every passing day. The Western Front had become a grim testament to the horrors of war. While the Western Front was locked in a deadly stalemate, the Eastern Front was a whirlwind of movement and chaos. The Eastern Front, a vast expanse stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, was a theater of war marked by fluidity and rapid changes. The German and Austro-Hungarian forces clashed repeatedly with the Russian army in a series of brutal battles. In contrast to the trench warfare of the Western Front, the Eastern Front was characterized by more traditional warfare, with large movements of troops and sweeping offensives. The Battle of Tannenberg, for instance, was a decisive engagement where the Germans inflicted a catastrophic defeat on the Russian Second Army. This victory boosted German morale and marked the beginning of a series of German successes in the East. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire, aligned with the Central Powers, opened up a new front in the war. The Gallipoli campaign was a significant event here, where the Allies attempted to seize control of the Dardanelles Strait, a crucial sea route. Despite a fierce and costly battle, the Allies failed to break through, marking a major victory for the Ottoman Empire. The war also expanded beyond Europe into the Middle East and Africa. In the Middle East, the British and Ottoman empires clashed in battles such as the Siege of Kut and the Arab Revolt. In Africa, German colonies were under attack by British, French, and Belgian forces. Despite being far from the main theaters of war, these regions saw intense fighting, with local populations heavily impacted. The Eastern Front's fluidity, the Ottoman Empire's involvement, and the war's expansion into other continents underscored one critical fact. World War I was not confined to the fields of Flanders or the trenches along the Somme. It was a conflict that reached across oceans, mountains, and deserts, touching people and places far removed from the shots that rang out in Sarajevo in 1914. The war had truly become a global conflict. As 1918 dawned, the end was in sight, but the cost had been high. The final year of the war saw a series of desperate offensives. The Central Powers, bolstered by the capitulation of Russia, sought to deliver a knockout blow before the full strength of the United States could be brought to bear. However, the tide of war was turning. The German Spring Offensive, while initially successful, eventually stalled due to logistical issues and the resilience of the Allies. By summer, the Allies had counterattacked. The 100 Days Offensive, a series of rapid and decisive battles, pushed the Central Powers back. These offensives marked the beginning of the end. The Central Powers were crumbling from within due to economic hardship, political unrest, and the relentless pressure of war. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, the guns fell silent. The armistice was signed, marking the end of the war on the Western Front. It was a moment of relief, but also of profound sorrow for what had been lost. The peace that followed was no less complex than the war itself. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in mid-1919, sought to formalize the end of hostilities and lay the groundwork for a lasting peace. However, its punitive measures stirred resentment, especially in Germany, setting the stage for future conflicts. The aftermath of the war was felt far beyond the battlefields. Empires had fallen, new nations had emerged, and the world map had been redrawn. The societal impact was immense, with a lost generation mourning their fallen comrades. Technological advancements in warfare had brought about unprecedented destruction, forever changing the face of combat. The war also brought about significant political changes, with the rise of communism and fascism, and a shift towards self-determination and democratic ideals. The League of Nations was formed in the hope of preventing future wars, but its effectiveness would be put to the test in the tumultuous decades that followed. World War I had ended, but its echoes would be heard for generations to come.